Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our interactive live stream panel for today, Still Seen But Not Heard. I'm Tom Nance. I'm one of the managers at Western Sydney Community Forum. I'm glad you're joining us this afternoon. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands we're all on today. I myself am on Darug land, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd like to also acknowledge with respect all our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues who are in the virtual room joining us today. So I'm really excited to be hosting today's panel, which is all about children's spaces and children's design. In today's session, we'll ask the question, do children have the right to collaborate in how spaces and policy responses that affect them are designed? And we're really interested in particular to see how COVID-19 has changed things for kids. So I'm delighted to introduce our panelists in a moment, but first, I would like to encourage you all to get involved, those of you who are joining us today, by asking questions. You can do this in a couple of ways. Firstly, if you're joining us on the Zoom platform, you can choose to raise your hand. When we unmute you, you'll be able to ask your question and we'll be able to hear your voice, which is always welcome. You can also type in your question through the Q&A function and I will be able to relay that to our panel. For those of you joining us on YouTube today, we encourage you to ask your questions through that platform by typing into the chat, and those questions will be fed through to me as well. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce you to our three panelists and get the ball rolling. Our first panelist joins us from Blacktown City Council, and that, of course, is Maia Giordano. We also have joining us today Dr. Girish Lala from Western Sydney University and their Young and Resilient Research Centre. And finally, last but definitely not least, we have Blake Tatafu, who's from Kimberwalli Centre for Aboriginal Excellence. Welcome to the three of you. Thanks for joining us. So I'm going to start us off with a question for all three of you, but I think Maia will throw to you first. What do you think are the different spaces in terms of policy and also public space where children dwell or where they're impacted by policy decisions?
I think children dwell in all areas of our community. The UN Child Rights, the UN Child Friendly Cities model that looks at how we embed children's rights in planning for cities and communities at a local level really highlights that that children don't just inhabit parks and schools, that they're actually across the community in all places. And so I suppose that's why we're here. That's why they need to be engaged across all areas, just as they don't just play where there's play equipment, walking along the street, or the way they engage with the space is really unique. So that sort of strengthens what we do.
Definitely. And Blake, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with Maya. I think young people are everything. They're the consumers, they're the audience, and then the target of everything in our communities. And all these different levels of community in our infrastructure through our government, our local councils and our state councils make decisions that affect our young people every day. They encompass it all.
Definitely. And Girish, I see you nodding as well.
Yep. I mean, I think that's absolutely right. Children dwell everywhere, right? I mean, children are people. So in a general sense, we all live in the same spaces. I mean, a couple of points, I guess, I absolutely agree with Maia and Blake. A couple of other points I'd just like to make maybe quickly. You know, we can make efforts to define specific spaces where children don't dwell or that we think children don't dwell, but that's not really the point, because we can do that for any particular group, right? We can say children don't go to the space, but that's the case with any group. So it makes no sense to do that. So children, in that sense, dwell everywhere. But the other thing I wanted to, or the other way I think about it is that we also need to think about what we mean by spaces. And so we think about spaces and places as physical, and they certainly are there. But there are also other spaces that we can think of, like emotional spaces and the spaces of our minds and our thoughts. And so you know, individually we have these thoughts and emotions, but our thoughts and emotions can also be influenced by other people's thoughts and emotions, and children occupy and have those same sorts of physical, emotional and cognitive thought-based spaces as well. And so, you know, they're just people, and so people have those spaces. Children are people, children occupy those spaces as well.
Yeah, and look, as you say, children dwell everywhere, and the three of you are no doubt agreed on that. And I just want to drill down a little bit, because if children do dwell everywhere, which they do, how, and Maia, this is a question for you, how do we centre children then in everyday business, sometimes when that business doesn't seem to involve children at all?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think firstly, I don't think children need to be centred in every business. It's not that it's core business and they're central, but if your service is for children, if children come through your door in any way, shape or form, then their needs need to be considered. I mean, in Mount Druitt, 20% of residents are children 12 and under. So people need to recognise that a place that is meeting the needs of children, that is inclusive of children, will actually benefit other groups as well. I mean, when I say the words resident or community, how many people listening automatically think of including children in that definition? I think we often say the community and think of adults. We talk about children and young people as this sort of other group, but they're really core to that. I mean, an example, if you're designing a door, if a child can go to the toilet by themselves, but the door is too heavy, they can't open it. By designing a door with that child in mind, then it also makes that door accessible and usable for parents with prams, for elderly people with a walking stick, for people with mobility issues. So just by considering children as one of the users in your service, your product, your organisation, you're going to be more inclusive and more accessible. Mm. So, yeah, I think that's sort of important. And I mean, I think in terms of including and embedding children, like it or not, it does often take one person to champion the idea of listening to children and kind of reframe the way an organisation thinks and about and values children. And it's in that strengths and rights-based way. Just by asking, you know, how does this impact children? Or what about asking children? You can really plant the seeds across your organisation and your work. And I really invite everyone who's listening to this to say at your next team meeting, just ask the question, you know, how does this impact children? I know there was a school in the Blue Mountains who they're doing their 5-year strategic plan. They sent out a message, we're starting our strategic planning process, and of course we'll be speaking to parents and teachers. And I asked the question, what about the kids? They're the lifeblood of the school, surely. And just by asking that question, they went, oh, of course. And so that's kind of set in motion this way of listening to children that is starting to get traction amongst the teachers, and, you know, to the point where there's a year 3-4 group of girls that meet with the principal every week and share ideas about how to activate the library in morning tea time or lunch. And, you know, I notice you chopped down the tree over there. We don't like that. What's that about? And so they're holding leaders to account. But that didn't happen before opening that door and actually just saying, you know, actually just saying to kids, we're listening, we take you seriously.
Mm. And thank you, Maia, for sharing that example, because I think sometimes what's really useful is to see that it doesn't need to be bigger than Ben-Hur when we're talking about engaging with children. There are some really small, relatively tangible things we can do to do that more effectively. Now, I'm going to go to you, Girish, and I'm aware that, you know, you have done a bunch of work in terms of engaging with children to design international indicators on violence prevention. In terms of that, why didn't the development of the indicators include children's voices initially, do you think?
Well, I mean, the framework you're talking about, Tom, is the INSPIRE framework. And so that was developed by UNICEF along with 10 sort of prominent international agencies and organisations like the World Health Organization and the World Bank, etc., plus a host of input from other national and international groups and agencies. And the aim of the framework was to help governments and NGOs and other agencies track the progress, I guess, of their initiatives to prevent and respond to violence against children. It's very detailed and useful in that regard. It's sort of pitched a bit at governmental, national levels. The way that those, it launched fairly recently, so it's not all that old. I think 2016 they launched it. The way that it was developed was that the organisations that were part of that that body that were putting it together drew on previous sort of processes and measures and indicators that were in use, that they were using and that they knew about. They drew them together. So they were traditional tools and methods and processes. They came together, the group that was developing the framework assessed all of those, categorized those into, you know, by theme and category, and framed them in a way that would be more useful and accessible for governments and large organisations to look at and understand what they did and pick and choose. Now, it's a really robust and very good comprehensive framework for that. But of course, one of the consequences of drawing on traditional processes and tools and indicators is that those traditional processes may not, and often didn't, include children, right? Because they just weren't considered at that point. Now, what's really interesting about the INSPIRE framework is that when they launched the framework, at launch, they actually explicitly acknowledged that gap. It's explicit in the framework itself. They say that, you know, this is what we're presenting, this is what it's for, but here are some of the gaps, and some of the gaps are children's involvement. And so they were really interested and aware that children need to be involved. And the process, the project that I was involved in was part of their process to try to bring those children's voices in. So that sort of, it gives you a little bit of an explanation about why it was missing, but also the good thing is that there was an acknowledgement that it was missing, and there's a process to try to include those voices now.
Okay. And what's the secret? I mean, for all of our practitioners out there, you know, you talked about this being a process to engage children. If you were to offer one or two key little bits of info or advice or insight that you've got from this project, what would they be?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm sure that Maia and Blake will have very good advice about that as well. There's a few things, I guess. Look, I think that there are some principles that guide the way that we work with children and young people. And I think, you know, key to that is it's really important to recognise the particular skills and experiences that children have, and that's children across all ages, all age ranges. Right, children are subject matters on being children, right? And so if you are you know, experts on being children, and so you have to listen to that wisdom that they bring. You also have to have the right motivation, I think. So you have to go into these sorts of projects working with children, not just to include children sort of as a token voice, not just to say that in my report, I can put in a couple of quotes from children and that sort of demonstrates that I've included children in my work. That's not really the right motive, or that's not the right motivation. you have to go in with the motivation of accepting that that children are these experts in particular fields, and that they have valuable and important information that can guide your process and inform the conclusions, right? So it's that you're collaborating with children as partners. So that's really important. You know, there are some mechanical sorts of things. You know, you have to be honest and open with children, and this is not just the case for children. You know, when you're working with all age groups, you have to be honest and open about what you can achieve, what the challenges are, but what the opportunities are. You know, and the other key thing to remember as you're doing this is that it's a learning process. We learn as we go through. I'm still learning about how best to involve children, the most effective ways to do that, the most effective ways to centre children. And so hopefully, as each project develops, I learn a little bit more and I get better at that role.
Thanks for sharing the insight, Dr. Girish. And I'm going to go to Blake now. Now, of course, over the past couple of years, you've really been taking the idea of Kimberwalli and making it into a reality. A lot of that has been down to how you've engaged with children. So can you tell us a bit more about how you engaged with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children to make Kimberwalli a reality?
Sure. I just want to touch back on the idea of looking at communities and residents as a whole. And I agree on one side that sometimes we don't look or consider children as a part of that group. However, I will say from a personal and slightly professional perspective, in Aboriginal communities, we always look at our children as being the centre of our communities, because not only are they our future, but they're our investment of our culture, our language, our skills, and our custom to continue that as time goes on. So, but working in this world, I also see that a lot of children are often forgotten, and their voices and their expertise as young people is always underestimated in a really big way. And that's what makes Kimberwalli so unique, is that the entire premise of Kimberwalli is founded upon the experiences and expertise of young people in Western Sydney. And I do also take that comment that Girish said about, at times people can consult or work with young people as a tokenistic means of ticking a box or filling in a requirement of research. And I myself was a part of the committee that helped establish Kimberwalli as a young person. And I've worked on a lot of different committees and been a part of a lot of groups. And Kimberwalli, the way that Aboriginal Affairs worked with us, really removed any element of that, the tokenization of our expertise and our worth and our time, because our time was really valuable. And it still is. Young people's time and expertise are valuable. We all grow up being experts in our own lives. All four of us that are on the screen right now have our own expertise of what it was like when we were young in all our different stages. And that changes as time moves on. So the expertise we got for Kimberwalli is from the current set of young Aboriginal people. As a part of the Project Advisory Committee, we made it a mission that we consulted with as many people as we could across Western Sydney within our peer group, within the captured age of 12 to 25. I even ran one with 5-year-olds, like a really basic focus group, saying, what do you want for your future? If you could be anywhere between here and the stars, where would you be? And young people's reviews and reflections of how to see themselves in society is also really important and really inform the way that we'll be moving forward. You know, a part of our values at Kimberwalli is young people are centred. Absolutely. They will continue to shape and lead us and direct us in the way that best accommodates for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people in Western Sydney. They will continue to lead the way in what is relevant and what is contemporary for them. It's funny, our name Kimberwalli is of Darug language, which means many stars. And the reason why that was so necessary and relevant to us is that for time immemorial across all different Indigenous cultures, stars were used as a tool of navigation. And here at Kimberwalli, we want to assist our young people who we see as our future stars. We want to navigate them to their pathways in which support them best. And those pathways have been developed by young people for young people. And that's really been special to me, to be a part of that project for a number of years, and our work here to continue transformational work with Aboriginal young people in Western Sydney of all walks of life. We always make sure that, as you're young people, but sometimes there's programs and different opportunities which leave a lot of young people out. The well-to-do kids always have opportunities to do well. We want to be able to talk to someone who's got a rap sheet this long, or has just come out of their corrective services, and be able to say, you have a place here at Kimberwalli. We want to talk to someone who has challenging disabilities, to say you are just as equal and have a place at Kimberwalli, because your time is valuable, your experience is valuable, and your future is valuable. And Kimberwalli want to invest in that future for young people. And that's what makes it so different for me. Having experience of kind of being tokenized at one point in time, being a young Aboriginal male, being a young Tongan male as well. My viewpoints and experiences were used for research, where here with Kimberwalli, our community investment and contribution to community, and their contribution to us, is this almost reciprocated way of working together in the future, where everyone's considered, they're heard, and they're valued.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that insight, Blake. And it's really encouraging to hear, I guess, about the reciprocal nature of Kimberwalli's relationship with children in the community. And I guess I want to segue to you, Maia. Now, obviously, we've been talking about, we need to talk to children. We need to make sure we're engaging with them. Of course, there's that dynamic around where we're taking from them in terms of their opinions, in terms of their thoughts. How can we talk to children and engage with children without it being almost exploitative, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's any sense that what you're doing is exploitative, then you're doing it wrong. So listening to children doesn't or shouldn't include exploitation. In fact, it's the opposite, because it's actually about embedding children's right to shape the world around them at the local level in everything they see. So with that said, it's not exploitation. I mean, how you do it is really important. As Blake suggested, his experience shows that how you do it, there's a wrong and a right way to do it. But if you can go in an open and, well-intentioned way, and I think, the door should always be open for people to come and go. This idea that you have to join an advisory group and it's around a board table and you're appointed for a year, it just doesn't reflect the way children or young people want to engage. It needs to be short term. It could be one-off, but the door needs always to be opened for people to get more involved or less involved. And we look at how we value people's contributions. So certainly we value children's time and young people's time. If you're sitting around a table and they're sharing their story, the likelihood is everyone else is being paid to do that, to be there. It's part of their job. What they're sharing, their lived experience, that's shaping and improving the work of those workers around the table. So include money in the budget for a voucher, and also ask, what does value mean to you? When I worked at Cumberland Council, we consulted a group of young people. We had a group of young people that we were already involving, and we asked them all to bring along a young person that's never been involved in anything. And one of those young people, we asked, what does value mean to you? Like, what makes you feel valued when you're part of a youth participation process? And the two things he said were to just be asked questions and to get a text saying, thanks for coming, you know, insert name. And so I think by asking children and young people, what does value mean to you? It's not always about pizza because they'll only come if there's food. It's about being taken seriously. And that's what we were saying around, you know, honest and open. If you're wanting to know what colour, you know, what colour cushions should I have in the waiting room? Ask that, that's fine. And then next time they go in, they said blue, and hey presto, there's blue cushions. It doesn't always have to inform the strategic direction of what you're doing. But seeing that what they say is actually shaping what people are doing, it's really powerful. And I think if done well, it's actually mutually transformational. I'm not the same because I've heard what you said and I've done something about it. I couldn't do it all, but I've done 3 out of the 10 things you said. They are not the same because they see their value reflected in how you respect them, and that has meaning for them.
Thanks, Mike.
Sorry, just that's I think that's really powerful. I think Maia and Blake. I was going to say that part of that is I think something that Maia said earlier on, that you don't necessarily have to have a whole, if you're in an organisation, you don't have to have everyone on board. You can, as an individual, start to make these outreaches and, you know, think about involving children, etc. But you have to be, when you get to the point of actually working with children, then you have to be realistic. You do need, ultimately, you're going to need some institutional support at some level for that work to be meaningful, right? And so you need to be really honest with people, the children you're working with, about what you can, why you're engaging, what you're hoping to achieve, what you think you can realistically achieve. You know, you shouldn't promise that you're going to be able to change the cushion colour if you can't change the cushion colour, right? That sort of thing. And so that's really important. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do that work, but it is important that you understand and you're clear with children. And it might just be the case that, you know, you say to children, well, I'm working with you because we actually do want we want people in our organisation to understand that children have a voice and have meaningful ideas, right? We want to get your ideas. There's no guarantee that they're going to be implemented, but by getting your ideas, this is what we're going to be able to try to advocate for. It might just be that. Or it might be the case that you do have the institutional support and that, you know, you're going to actually be able to enact some of those changes. You have to understand, you know, where that level lies, I think.
Yeah, thanks for that insight. It definitely is a really important one in terms of not only, I guess, being open and honest in terms of what you're wanting to achieve, but what you can realistically achieve as well, and not over-promising that. I'm aware we do have a couple of questions I'll cross to in a minute, but please, I know all of our audience members are sitting in appreciative silence at the moment from the insights of our 3 panellists. However, I do encourage you to ask your questions as well. And I believe on that note, we have a question on YouTube. I think I'm going to cross live now to our YouTube correspondent.
We have a question from Morgana. It says, it's directed to Blake. Is it okay for non-Aboriginal workers and or organisations to engage with Aboriginal youth? Or do you recommend we hire Aboriginal cultural consultants to make it safe for Aboriginal kids?
Blake, I'm sorry, buddy. You're actually on mute at the moment. The phrase of the year.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. That's a really great question, and I'm glad that's actually being asked. I may not have an answer that applies to everybody's circumstances in that particular space, but when it comes to engaging young Aboriginal people, it's always best to have someone there that is either Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, just for cultural safety. If there's any form of anything sensitive that's shared within that space, anything that is or anything that might be misunderstood because of their background, a lot of young people might feel a little bit gun shy to completely open up unless there's someone that they relate to, that they trust and they support. But cultural safety is so important in all of these phases of consultation and engagement. So hiring a consultant to be a part of that process, maybe someone from the community in which you're trying to reach, is the best way forward. And they can also advise you in how you work practically when you are doing that engagement or that research or that consultation.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Blake. And also, Morgana, thanks for that question. An absolute cracker. So we're going to go
just quickly. Can
Sorry.
I just add a quick perspective on that as well? And this is from my perspective as an academic, and so it's, you know, the types of projects and the way we work is slightly potentially different. But what I would say is just reinforce that we, as an academic group, we would never work with an Indigenous group of children or an Aboriginal group, or indeed a group of children from any culture without first consulting experts there. We would, in fact, it would be more than a consultation, we would partner. Right. So we would try to develop a partnership that would involve not just advice, but potentially co-facilitation, that sort of thing. So yeah, those sorts of issues of cultural safety are paramount, really. And they're very important to the way, the effectiveness of your engagement.
Yeah, it's a really good point in terms of, I guess, engaging with our many diverse communities in Western Sydney, the need to do that in a culturally safe way, a respectful way, because not only is that, you know, going to produce better results, as you allude to, but also it also means that's a better outcome for the children we're engaging with.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go to another question now, and this is one through the Zoom platform. And this question, it starts off nicely. It says, such an important discussion. I'd like to hear from the panellists on their thoughts about the shift over the last few decades to building neighbourhoods and cities to accommodate cars and infrastructure rather than to accommodate children and indeed people generally. What can we do with this in mind to influence decision makers? Who would like to take that one? I think I'm going to throw it to you, Maia.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's also a shift around livability, this concept of livability of spaces. I mean, I think I'm a big believer that children and young people don't need to understand the inner machinations of decision making to be able to influence. In my advocacy work, I often go to decision makers and say, what do you base your decisions on? And then capture data and share stories. I think, you know, my vision for how we involve children and young people across Western Sydney is that we don't just all work in isolation, just asking our own clients or our own young people questions. But to your question, if we all asked children and young people their vision for the spaces that they inhabit, how they want, what does livability mean to them? If every service, everyone who has any contact with children, whether it's a parent, a worker, anyone, if we all asked kids, tell us your vision, tell us your story, what is this focus on cars and transport stopping you from doing, and we share and capture that story, I think it's really powerful. So we're not working in isolation, just asking our clients or our group, but actually to have influence, you need to be able to tell a broader story. And children have got that lived experience that we can draw on.
So it's almost being a conduit, if you will, for those stories, for those lived experience when we're looking at influencing decision makers in that regard.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, your role, Tom, or any peak body, most of my work has been in peak advocacy bodies. And, children don't have to be told they've got a voice. Like, they are just not listened to necessarily, or it's just not done in a effective way. But if we can get that right, and I see my main role as being, a conduit and connecting. If, Tom, in your work, you've got connections with people that are making those decisions, that are setting those 50-year visions. Children and young people aren't necessarily part of that. I know Greater Sydney Commission are doing some great work. They've got a youth panel that's paid role, but we could be doing more to actually make sure that our children, the children we are connected to, are able to tell their story, and it's collated and shared. It's not a big undertaking. It doesn't have to be $1 million project. It can just be, we all undertake to ask 2 questions, and then we all send it to Tom.
It sounds like you're creating work for me, Maia.
Yeah.
So Blake, I saw you nodding as well during that. I'm thinking you're agreeing in terms of that's the way we can influence decision makers more effectively.
100%. And when Maia was speaking, I was relating to what she was saying from perspective of when I work with young people in out-of-home care. Their experiences and everything around them changes so rapidly that I don't think in my experience that there was ever a time where there was ever a forced process or a mandatory process where we asked our young people outside of case plan time, what could make your experience better? What would you see as a home? What does a positive school life look like for you? And I think it is really asking those 1 or 2 easy questions of a young person's view or how they see the world better through their eyes. In whatever facet that is, that starts that difference, that will be that catalyst for change. That's informed and has young people there alongside all of us.
And I've just seen now there's a couple of questions coming through, which is great news. And the first is from Beck Reedy, a longtime friend. Hello to Beck. And she's asked, hypothetically, if an organisation is just starting to become aware of this issue, and it's just on their radar now, and they go, right, we need to do something about it. What are some of the first steps that they can take in order to build this into their work, into their practice? And I think I'll ask you, Dr. Girish, what are your 1 or 2 things, do you think?
Look, I think that there are a number of, so I think the first thing is just to be aware that there's a lot happening in the space. And so there are lots of resources that you can potentially start to draw on to understand effective strategies. Not to spruik too much my own institution, but I will. But so, for example, Young and Resilient, Western Sydney University, we're a relatively new research centre. We're trying to bring together work that's been going on for a number of years in this space. We're trying to put together resources and toolkits, etc. And there are a number of other research centres at different universities that are sort of offering sort of thing and similar sorts of things. A number of community organisations I know have those sorts of resources there as well. There are people like Maia and Blake and myself that you can reach out to and you can talk to and you can say, you can contact us and you can say, this is what these are my ideas. Can we talk about it? Can we partner maybe, or can you advise, right? So that's the first thing. I think that the other thing is to potentially start to talk to other people or start to share your ideas within your organisation, because you might be surprised that There might be other people there that are thinking along the same lines. Oh yeah, actually, I've been thinking about that as well. Let's try to generate something. Right? So particularly because, as I've said, and I think the others have said, there is this growing wave, if you like, or realization about the importance of this type of work, of involving children, of centering, not always centering children, but centering children, involving children in that space, in those sorts of decisions. I think, you know, one of the things I wanted to say is that the work that we do, particularly we being myself and my colleagues, is also not just, we very rarely work exclusively with children. We work intergenerationally, if you like. And so I think realizing the importance of intergenerational work is really important as well. So I think that what we tend to do, the way that we tend to work is that we work with children and adults separately, but then we try to bring them together as well. Right. And so thinking about how that can happen, because, and the reason I say that is it's often important to work with children and adults separately because you know, children and adults do, depending on the cohorts, do have different needs and different ways of working and different methods that are appropriate for particular questions. And in a way, it's preparing them for the next phase of intergenerational work. But the key thing there, I think, is to be thinking about that next phase, because bringing people together intergenerationally is a way of getting both sides to understand that there is the potential for that meaningful dialogue and change to happen. And particularly, I have to say, to make adults understand that, oh, actually, children are serious about these things. They have serious, meaningful ideas, right? And working in intergenerational groups like that with particular goals in mind, I can say, honestly, I think we've never had that fail. We've always come out with positive experiences at the end of that, both from children and adults.
Can I just add to that? I mean, I think if you're new, I think working through trust relationships, if you're already engaging parents or community, or you know you're connected with a service that works with children, then you can go through that avenue. And I always get children to check my work. I wouldn't do a consultation or ask a bigger group without at least one child. I know people sometimes worry about tokenism, so let's not do it. And I would sort of say, don't not do it in case it's token, but, you know, be open about where you're at. I get kids to check what I've done, say, share what I want to achieve. This is what I'm doing. Do a first draft. These are the questions. Does it make sense? Could we make it better? What do you hear when I answer that question? And if you think they're not going to be comfortable speaking to you, work through those trust relationships. And then when I'm doing this postcard consultation at the moment. I had a colleague, a worker, looked at them and went, the team and I have, we've looked at your postcard. We don't think kids 12 and under will be able to answer these questions. I don't think they'll make sense. And I was able to say, well, I got Lethbridge Park Public School SRC to review the questions. They said they made sense. They will be in our childcare centres, so maybe for the younger kids. But I know that we've got a briefing sheet for the workers that will be working with the children. We've got a postcard on the front. It says, draw or write what makes a safe place for kids. And then on the back, there's a word cloud with lots of different types of roles, and says, who helps you when you don't feel safe? Mum, dad, grandma, doctor, all these different roles, and they can circle those. And then how do you want to give your ideas again? And there's a drop down list. So obviously for those younger kids, we'll need a worker to read that out. But for older kids, they can read it themselves. But it's been checked by kids. So I always feel confident. Yes, it might fail, but at least kids, it won't make sense to everyone, but kids have looked at my work, they've checked it, they've given it the green light, or they've said, no, that doesn't make sense, change it to this. Do that, tell them you've done it, and then go to the next step of engaging a bigger group.
Yeah, and I just love that example, Maia, because often when we hear about consultation, we consult, then we go away and we write the action plan, then off we go and we make it happen. But actually, engaging with kids, getting them to check you're working and give feedback provides that extra layer, not only to, inform and back up what you're doing, but also to make sure it's in line with what they were saying and what they were thinking. I think that's a really tangible way that you can move forward. So thanks for that question.
Sorry, can I just add? I think to your point, often we talk about community engagement on this linear trajectory. There's token or inform at the bottom, and then we're moving to like collaborate, empower. And I would challenge people and say, don't wait to collaborate or empower to involve kids at every step of the way. If you're at the inform end and you've got a postcard where you want to tell kids a dance class, whatever, get them to check it over. Does the wording make sense? Do the pictures, are they too kiddie if it's for young people? Are they too old if it's, would they prefer cartoons, whatever? Don't wait to this like child-led multi-stakeholder project to involve kids at every step of the way. Get them to check your work, tell them what you did, tell the organisation that you've listened to them, then collate feedback when you do the broader one, tell the kids what you've done, what you're going to do next, and then tell your organisation, this is what kids have said, and ask them, how do you want us to feed back to you? Yeah. Could be a video, could be a spot the difference. You could ask parents or ask staff and kids and do a spot the difference picture. It can be like, you can really have fun with feedback, but you've got to do it.
Yeah. And I've got time to sneak in one last audience question before we start to wrap up. I'm going to lob this one to you, Blake. Now, often we talk and we hear about collaborating with one another. This isn't old news within the sector. This isn't old language when we're working in, the line of work we do. But how do we achieve this effectively in the sector when we're collaborating, not only between service providers, not only between governments and institutions, but most importantly, children? How do we bring that all together in a meaningful way?
Making sure that the goal of working with one another is entirely focused on the child. In my time as a caseworker and a case manager, I've had partnerships and worked collaboratively with a lot of service providers, a lot of different government agencies, where at times we worked really well together as long as that young person was the focus of everything we did. If it was about logistics, if it was about budget, if it was about time, that kind of got in the way of what we were doing, which was the most important thing, was advocating or providing a service for a young person. And that's the only way I've seen it where it's worked so well, is that we're always coming back to the child. We're always coming back to focus on the best interests of the young person or the child. If that is the core and the main connection between yourself and another service provider or an institution, then you will work well, because that's what you're looking to achieve, to create better outcomes, make positive change, or even if it's about coming together to engage or host a space for young people, well, as long as their views and that outcome is specifically child-centered and child-centric, everything will work out fine.
A great point. I mean, if we keep the focus on the child and on the children within the community, that grounds the work that we do when we collaborate. So I'm going to, I guess, start bringing us to a close, and I'm going to ask you all a question, but I think we might hear from you first, Dr. Girish. What is one piece of advice, one really tangible piece of advice that you have from our audience today who may or may not be working directly with children? What's one piece of advice for them to make a practical difference in the lives of children, do you think?
That's a really tough question to narrow it down to one thing. And what I'm going to say, I'm not sure if it exactly answers your question, but one of my colleagues who's much cleverer than I made this point to me the other day. And she said, what we try to do in our work is, what we're trying to do is we want to be thinking about how enabling children and young people's participation makes us accountable to them in important and maybe new ways, but that emphasises children's rightful role as constituents of the present, not the future. And so by that, what we mean is, what she meant and what I think I want to emphasise is that, you know, one of the key thing when we're talking about child-centred work is we're not talking to children because, you know, we see them as potential future citizens that are going to contribute to a society when they're 18 and they, you know, start to work and whatever and pay taxes or whatever it is. The reason that we're talking to children is because we recognise, you know, that they are constituents of the present. Their current views matter. Their current experiences matter. And that's what we want to know and learn from. Don't know if that's quite specific enough, but I think that's a really, for us, that's an important general principle.
I mean, for me, I think that's definitely something that resonates not only with me, but no doubt with all of our viewers as well. It's a really important insight for us to keep in mind when we think about working with children. We're not just, when we talk about planning, thinking about how they're going to be at the age of 18 and what their needs and experiences are. It's what they need now. It's what their experience is like now as a child growing up in Western Sydney in 2020. Maya, I'm going to pan to you now. Same question. What's your piece of advice that you'd give to practitioners if they want to make a practical difference in the lives of children?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll start by seconding Girish's, you know, how you think about children matters. The way you frame them as an expert is really critical. There's an amazing book, Moss and Petrie, Children's Services to Children's Spaces, and they actually argue that the way we conceptualise children changes public provision for them. So it's not to be underestimated, I think. I mean, I think children are part of the community that you all serve. And I think practically, if you're honest and transparent and humble enough to say to kids, you're the expert, can you help me understand what you need, how this program is impacting you, get them to check your work, that they will tell you what needs to happen to make your work better. And just start small and build, but always just commit to being that person to say, you know, why don't we ask kids? And don't underestimate the power of that question.
Yeah, that's a really good point as well, Maya, around, you know, you said how you think about children matters. How we think about children in terms of consulting with them.
And also
learning with them, definitely.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and also who you speak to matters. If you're running a program for kids that have had experience with the justice system, don't speak to just any young person and go, tick. I spoke to a youth advisory group. the lived experience is the key piece. So if they're 10 and they've been homeless, you know, maybe they're the people, that's the group you need to speak to. Yes, you need to keep them safe, or need to speak to, you know, young people that have been through that experience. You don't want to re-traumatize them, but you need to draw on the right lived experience. It's not just children and young people, but the experience that is relevant to your work.
Thanks, Maia. And finally, Blake, what's your one piece of advice? What's your secret?
Well, I absolutely love what both Girish and Maia have said, and I try my best to adopt those techniques and skills when I work with young people. But kind of taking a little bit of what Maia said and being that person who starts that conversation, but always, and I think we've mentioned it before throughout our talk today, is always being open for young people to come in and out of the space for when they feel like they want to contribute or have their voices heard or add value. One of the things that I used to do with my team is, you know, have some self-reflection and think of yourself as a 5 or 6 year old, and how would you speak to yourself in order to do something that you didn't want to do, like the dishes or like put the rubbish away? What processes would you use with yourself as a 5-year-old? Would you ask, how can I get you to do them? Or would you put an incentive in place? And if you look at how you think as a 5-year-old, how you would have thought, talk to a 5-year-old today and see if it's the same kind of level of result or same kind of interaction that you've probably reflected yourself. And you'll more than likely find that you're way off the mark or you're very different, because times change, people change. Our young people are evolving, we're evolving, and keeping their current voices, like we've said, at the front of the game, at the front of their experiences and their value, is an important way to move forward. Like with our Aboriginal communities, we see our young people as the people who are going to take over from us, because that's where I've come from. I've come from a complete molding from my community, from their experiences and their triumphs, and I take that with me, and I'll pass it on to the next generation. So it's, and knowing that they're important because of who they're going to be, but how we can help them be who they want to be as well, and shape that way for them as well, with them. Yeah. I hope that makes sense.
It definitely does. And I just want to take this moment to thank all three of you. It's been an absolute pleasure to be on this panel with you and to listen to all of your insights. So firstly, thank you to Maia Giordano from Blacktown City Council. Thank you to Dr. Girish Lala from Western Sydney University. And last but definitely not least, thank you to Blake Tatafu from Kimberwalli Centre for Aboriginal Excellence. So today we've heard a lot of insight. There's a lot to digest. However, what I will say is there are a couple of things that stuck out for me. Firstly, children dwell everywhere. It isn't a linear or sorry about that. It isn't I guess, a defined space where children only live, like school, like playgrounds. They exist everywhere. And as a result, all of our decision-making and approaches need to factor that in. We heard from the panel today about the importance of maintaining the focus being on the child and on the child's interests when we plan, when we make decisions, and to make sure that we take their opinion, their experience, their insight seriously as well. Often, as our panelists alluded to, it's about how you think about children that matters. And I encourage us all to think about the way that we do that within our practice. Of course, Western Sydney Community Forum not only do these interactive live streams, but also a bunch of other things. So please make sure you check out our website or pick up the phone and give us a call, because we're always happy to chat. That's about it from me. I'm pleased to have joined you today. Take care. Be good. And this is Tom Nance signing off.